Welcome back to the conversation where the intent is just to have dialogue with regular people. This one was a fun one where I get to hear the life story of my good friend Paul Hartung, which begins in earnest in high school, where he becomes a drug dealer, steals a cop car, impersonates a cop, joins the Navy to rehabilitate himself. Whilst in the Navy, gets caught for his drug addiction, meets a Galilean peasant, starts a Bible study on his ship, leaves the Navy, gets married, has some kids, gets multiple sclerosis, later goes to Mexico to get chemotherapy, comes back to the States just in time for our world to descend into chaos from the COVID. He has thoughts about that. As before, there are chapter markers in the description below, so feel free to move about the conversation. Lastly, this episode is sponsored by yours truly. If you're looking to buy or sell property in the Portland metro area, you can reach out to me by going to anderson37.com. Now on to the show. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in southeast Portland mostly. Briefly, we were in Aloha from 79 to 80 before my parents split up, but it was mostly a southeast Portland kid.
And how old were you when they split up?
Oh gosh, had to be darn near 10, 9.5, 10, and it was really tough because when you're 9.5, 10, your view of the world, your view of right and wrong are bound up in this relationship that you observe in the marriage of your parents.
Yeah.
And all of their moral instruction is tied to the integrity of their promise to each other. And so while we didn't articulate it that at 9, 10 years old, when they said, we're getting divorced, don't cry, shut up, it doesn't matter, your questions don't matter, we're just doing this, we felt like, well, all bets are off. You know, like why, if mom and dad's promise to each other isn't durable, then is anything they've ever said to us durable?
Yeah, doesn't mean anything.
What's durable?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have siblings?
I do. I was one of 4 boys. We were all about a year and a half apart. Tight succession from 69 to 74. My mom had...
So are you the oldest, youngest?
I'm the third of 4 boys.
So the other kids were in high school and junior high and when your parents would...
And we were all still in elementary school. I was in 3rd grade, heading into 4th grade. My oldest brother was 5th grade, heading into 6th.
Okay.
So...
And so they weren't Christian.
No, but my parents, it was interesting because during their fights with each other, they'd stick us on a Sunday school bus. And so there was a little Baptist church down the street that gave out lots of candy. And so if you said the magic prayer over and over again, you get lots of candy. So that was for us kind of an escape.
So they sent you there, kind of like boarding school to fix you?
No, this was just once a week on Sunday mornings.
A week. Okay.
And so even though we weren't church people, that was my first kind of sideways foray into that.
So what was high school like?
Oh gosh, it was very brief for me. As a freshman, by that time, I was already a criminal and a drug dealer.
So okay, explain this.
You asked about high school. So.
How did you get into? So you were a drug dealer.
Well, you have to fund your addiction, right? And so the best way to fund it is to...
So you were addicted to
eat the profits, basically. Yeah,
okay,
mostly weed by the time I was 12, 13. Alcohol. Started doing other drugs that were also party-type drugs, but they were just so much more expensive. Like cocaine was the avant-garde drug of the 80s, but it was designer and very expensive, so we hardly ever got that. But you could get opium-laced weed, as crazy as that sounds, just to make it more death-defying, supposedly. But yeah, it was mostly weed that funded my enterprise.
So you're a drug dealer. Where would you get like your supply? Like at the high school or?
No. You always found a single adult who dealt out of their home, and they always take sympathy on young people because they see themselves in you. And so if you're coming to buy an ounce of weed from them, which is a big purchase, they give you good deals, and you could.
Did you ever get caught?
Well, that was it, right? I mentioned to you that my high school stint was very brief. I started my sophomore year at Tigard High School. Before halftime of that season, I did get caught by a police officer off campus making a deal. And
so he was undercover, or how did he?
No, he actually just happened upon us. It was dumb luck.
So you were doing something and he just stopped.
Yeah, and I had so much product and there was no way to escape. So dumb and foolish. I had gotten away with it up until that point, but Tigard was pretty uppity at that time.
Yeah.
And they said if you don't go to rehab, you can't come back to high school. And so rehabs back then were about $3,000, and we're just white trash. So I had to, at 15, quit school formally. I had to work full time, and then I had to go to Portland Community College to placate my dad's firm demands at that time. So it's ironic, Greg, because my dad and mom were the ones that got us started smoking and drinking and getting stoned. And so it was our lifestyle mirroring their lifestyle, but somehow through his embarrassment, and he just raised these standards, said you're gonna pay for your own school. So I just started the adult lying kind of double life at age 15. That's when I got a lot more sophisticated with the deception. So you start believing your own lies when you get good at it.
So how does that? So did that? Now you joined the military or the Navy. Did that somehow play into, like, what caused you to join the armed forces?
So I had nothing going for me that was good other than this girlfriend who I liked at the time.
Was she into drugs too? Or?
She was not. She was from the other side of the tracks up in Lake Oswego.
Very uppity. But she was hanging out with you, though.
Yeah, I represented her wild side, apparently, playing with danger. So I was 17, and I went on a criminal bender. Basically, some things went sideways, and when you tell yourself it doesn't matter anymore, you start making decisions that are really reckless.
Yeah.
I stole a police officer's personal vehicle where he left his gun, his wallet, his handcuffs, and his keys under the seat of his tricked out Mustang 5.0. And
how did you discover this?
I was on the streets. Me and my dad had a falling out. I was no longer in my home. Yeah. And again, I was in a really rough patch where you tell yourself you don't care.
Yeah.
And so it was a surreal time, but stealing the car felt almost like a lark or a gag, but once you're in it...
I mean, with a gun
and
too.
A badge,
like it's not...
Within hours of stealing that car, I'm downtown Portland making false arrests to take people's weed.
You were, seriously?
With the gun and the badge.
You know, so, I wouldn't recommend this movie to anybody, but it sounds like the premise of the movie... what's that movie? The Hangover. Or the Hangover part, I saw part of it flipping through channels.
Okay.
Like, that's literally the premise of it. It sounds like it
sounds like a nightmare to me.
It sounds like a joke, like a sketch.
A lark almost, yeah. For sure.
So how did they... So you're making fake arrests, and then presumably they catch you.
They never caught me.
They never caught you.
They never caught me, no. But that girl I was telling you about, she spotted me in the car, and law enforcement had already been looking for me, and so she made a positive ID of me in the black Mustang. So me and a buddy were doing this together, and I tried to get rid of the vehicle. No one would steal it. It gets impounded.
So drove it into Lake Oswego.
But my buddy gets arrested. They took him down, and he called me from jail, saying, "Yo, they're on top of us. You might want to
get out of town.
Either get out of town or turn yourself in." And so I'm still 17, and I'm still thinking criminally. How can I get over on the system? How can I win?
Yeah.
If I turn myself in as a minor, like 2 days before my 18th birthday, I turn myself in as a minor. Oh wait, that's a little
less than if you do the 18 in one day.
But I had enlisted in the military prior to this, and this was an escape plan for me to say, I'm going to go before a judge. I'm going to tell the judge I've turned over a new leaf.
Yeah.
And that judge is going to say, hey, it's better to turn him over to the military where they can work on him than to keep him in a juvenile detention or something. So everything went according to my master plan, and I thought I was getting over. I thought I was winning. Kind of foolish to think that
So it worked though. The judge said, "Sure, go join the Navy."
Yeah.
Ended up in the Navy. And so, what year was that you joined the Navy?
1990.
1990, and you were 19, or you were 18.
Just turned 18 that summer. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was pretty young. Went in there, and you take with you all of your ghosts and skeletons and habits. So in the military, I was able to continue the lifestyle that I had led in Portland, but just with more sophistication and hiding. We had urinalysis tests, those kinds of things that were going on. But it was pretty easy for me to beat those things.
Where do you get drugged? I mean, there are other people in the military that have. Yeah.
So when you're in that world, you can sense other people who are in that world. You can joke about it, talk about it, and sort of network.
Yeah, how they receive your
I got busted though. After the war was over, it was 1991. We were doing regular training operations outside of Europe, and went to Germany. And I'm on a working ship, so when you get off a working ship, it's like you want to run and get blasted because your daily reality is such a glum.
Yeah. And was this an aircraft carrier?
No, it was a fast combat support ship that it takes the idea of an oil tanker, ammo munitions ship, a stores logistics ship, and a people mover, and they made it a super tanker and outfitted it with weapons.
Okay.
So you can go into the combat. You keep the battle group.
Super tanker though, that seems like a big flaw because people can just full of oil or.
It's true, but the irony is that like with aircraft carriers and these kinds of fast combat support ships, is they're fast.
They're fast, so they can outrun.
Even though they're not small or nimble, they have high top speed, which on the ocean it matters a lot.
So how many crew were on that ship?
About 600, 650 during the war.
And you said so you got caught, it sounds like you got caught, but after the war, or you had been deployed somewhere?
Yeah, exactly. We were doing this was non-wartime. We were doing a regular deployment, Mediterranean and then Western European seas. We went into Bremerhaven in Germany.
Okay.
And I got on a bus and went into Berlin, found a hash dealer, bought a bunch of that, and so we had our fill of that night. And it's funny, being criminally minded, I'm normally covering my tracks as a lifestyle. I didn't that night. I came back on the ship. I had too much to drink and smoke. I didn't hide my stash. So the next morning we're leaving, and you have responsibilities. You got to be somewhere. All of my drugs are still in my living space, and you
didn't put them away. You didn't conceal them.
I didn't totally conceal them. Yeah. I would normally hide it in the engine room or down near where the fuel is, so the dogs can't smell them. Well, the dogs can smell them when they.
But send dogs looking for.
Yeah. So that was the beginning of me losing my status, my future career in the Navy. This happened 1 month before the Navy changed their policy to zero tolerance.
So if you had gotten caught even a month later, then what would have happened?
The captain would have no discretion. The captain acts as, through what's called non-judicial punishment, acts as a miniature judge, jury, and executioner.
Yeah.
But with mandatories, he has to judge a certain way. So he still had discretion, and this captain that I'm staring at had a reputation. He would say to people like myself who were in trouble, "Son, do you want to stay in the Navy?"
Yeah.
And if you said yes, he'd kick you out. And if you said no, he'd keep you in. He would always give you the
reverse
opposite.
Psychology.
Yeah. So when he asked me that question, I just said, "Sir, I don't have anywhere else to go. I'll just go back to the streets where I came from."
Yeah.
So that's just the reality. I didn't say I wanted to stay or leave.
Yeah.
Secretly, I wanted to stay because I didn't want my family at home to know that the lie is over and I really am a lot worse than they think I am.
Yeah. So what did he say? He said
he busted me pretty hard. I stayed in. It was like being imprisoned on the ship for a good long time, losing all of your money, all of your freedom, any status, because it was drug related, and I was scheduled to go into more of the intelligence type training. I lost that.
That was over.
That was over.
So what were your roles before you got caught? What were your roles on the ship?
Yeah, with a ship like that, they have a really large deck department. Deck department is a versatile labor crew that does the mission of the ship, which is to help replenish the other ones. So it's a lot of easy to train manual labor type tasks. Very, very, very blue collar. Not a lot of sophistication there. So it was indentured servitude. It's knocking none of the panache that you'd see in a Navy commercial.
Yeah. So, okay, so what happened next? After you're everything's locked down, you're basically working as slave labor. You have no privileges.
So this was one of the three big things that knocked me down. To lose my naval status, my naval future, and you're locked in. It's like a prison sentence.
Yeah.
I mean, I signed up for 4 years, right? So, and this is happening just over a year into my time. So there's not a lot to look forward to. My dad gets brain cancer. And so even though me and my dad weren't good friends, I was a lot like him. Very criminally minded, able to get by, able to manipulate and deceive really well. He's dying. And this hits me hard because guys like me look at friends or family as assets.
Yeah.
What can they do for me? How do they enhance or otherwise help me? And the thought of losing my dad was, man, I feel really vulnerable. I feel alone in the world.
Yeah.
Because no matter how bad it was, Greg, I could always, I'm being chased by guys with guns, and I'm in this situation. I could always call him and say, what would you do?
Yeah.
And he would always give me a really self-serving, streetwise answer.
Like father, like son.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So within months of the first nail in my coffin, the second nail hits. My dad's dying of brain cancer. The Navy won't transfer me to the West Coast so that I can watch him die. It was really cruel and very tough. Simultaneous to that, also, the girl that I had been deceiving and trying to stay with figured me out finally and had a really good sense of self-preservation enough to let me go. And that was like the third thing that made me feel like, okay, I have nothing positive to look forward to in life.
But figure you out. I mean, surely dating someone, you can figure out that they're... Is it like she just didn't want to know and to just kind of distance herself? But I mean, surely she would have known. I mean, you can't date someone and know that they're into drugs and...
Oh, no, she knew what I was. She was still attracted to that person, but the situation was, I'm in the Navy for 3 more years. And
I see.
We were hoping to get married, but she wised up.
And she sort of had a... Yeah, that makes sense.
It's such a blessing for her.
Yeah.
So, but those 3 things happening in succession, coming around to 1992, late 92, led me to the place where I wanted to end it. Because like a true coward, I just soaked in and kind of reveled in feeling sorry for myself. Like if I can't play ball my way, I'm just not going to play.
Yeah.
And then the idea of death, when you're that depressed, and you don't care anymore, it's like a warm blanket on a cold day. It feels like deliverance. It feels like escape.
Yeah.
So that was what I'd contemplated for a long time. And with daily life on board ship as a kind of slave, where you don't have any freedoms, any choice in anything, and you work really hard for mediocre food, the practical plan of ending it was where I got stymied. I didn't really believe in an all-powerful deity. I had suspicions, but none of it was active, born out of research or a sincere heart.
Despite going to church every Sunday,
I had a little bit of,
or Sunday school or whatever.
Yeah. It's funny, even in my darkest day, I always told my brothers this. I said, whether we were partying, drunk, stoned, whatever, we never would have agreed with an atheist. We never would have been bold enough to say anti-theistic, anti-Christian things with our mouths, even though we take his name in vain and we are as vile as any other creature out there. There was like a kind of invisible line where you just say, well, you don't, just in case, you don't want to actually say those things. But heading into an attempted suicide, it's not on my mind at all. Because death feels like deliverance. It seems to the brain at that time just to be.
So even with your with your exposure, the limited exposure to church, you didn't feel like the thought never occurred to you that if I end it, I might stand before God and give an account for my life.
That didn't come until I put a knife to my right wrist, and the thought only then occurred to me.
That's interesting.
Only then, and it was a gut level feeling. It wasn't a series of thoughts.
Intellectual.
Extended.
It was intellectual. It was very.
And the feeling was, look, if you go through with this, you're going to find yourself on the other side in a situation like Scales. That's kind of the only way I could articulate it. It's like, and I would be on the wrong side of the scales.
By scales, you mean weight, measurement.
Thinking the way a normal sinner thinks, we say, if I do more good than bad, I'm on the right side of the scale.
I see. Yeah.
So just on that basic metric alone, I knew as a son of a bitch,
you knew that
I don't have enough time to counteract
to help enough old ladies across the street and
something like that.
Yeah.
So I was frustrated. Now you should know about my ship. There was a chaplain, but he got arrested for homosexually propositioning a young man. In 1992, you don't do that, right? Because they took him off in handcuffs. It wasn't quite Bill Clinton's military yet, right? So it was still a different place. So there was no one I could turn to.
Yeah.
The thought of living sucked. The thought of dying now sucked because I felt like there's judgment on the other side, but I don't know who the judge is, and I don't really.
Yeah.
That's not what I came into suicide for. Suicide was meant to be a deliverance, comfort. So, the chaplain's gone, and now the ship is getting ready to go on what's called a long cruise. Another devastating, depressing thought that you're leaving the United States for 6 more months to do what? Work.
Is that what you call a deployment?
Yeah, a long deployment. There can be shorter deployments. Okay. The long cruise, the long deployment is always 6 months.
Yeah. 6-month prison sentence, basically.
Yeah, so I figured I need to do some research and see if there is a judge without killing myself. And I made a couple of assumptions. Yeah. It was 1992 spilling over to 93 in that time frame, and I thought, well, if we reckon time from this one person's life, surely if there is a deity, it has to have something to do with Jesus. Yeah, we're spilling over from 92 to 93, and the chaplain had been arrested.
Talk about the fox being, the fox being in charge of the hen house.
So I didn't know any Christians on the ship. The ship was itself very dark. The morale was really low because the mission was to just work. Keep the carrier afloat. Keep everything out there going, which means you're just expendable. And so my investigation started with the little Gideon's New Testament that they gave us in boot camp.
Yeah.
And I figured if God is real, it has to have something to do with Jesus because it's 1992, reckoning time and years from this one person's life.
Oh, because time, years are symbolic of Christ. Is that what you mean?
No. I just figured, why this one person?
Okay.
Of all the so-called great names and personalities in the world, if even atheist regimes like China are marking time from Jesus Christ's life, death, resurrection, then we have to deal with Jesus somehow.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the assumptions I had. The other assumption was that God has to be personal. If he's real, you have to be able to reach him. You have to be able to know him, or at least verify some things about him objectively, because we're in a universe that seems wound up.
That's pretty interesting that you came to that realization, because I don't know if the average nominal American today would have that same clarity.
Well, I'm fighting with the feeling of judgment at this
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And that's a personal thing. You're going to be judged,
Yeah.
right? This sense of scales and righteousness.
Yeah.
That felt personal. So if that's true, if that gut level feeling that was there, then my intellectual extension of that was that, okay, if he wants to be known, he's knowable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I began with the Gospels, reading all alone. In the Navy, the only personal space you have is a coffin rack. It's a 3 by 3 by 6 cubicle with a curtain and a light. And there was my private time at night to begin reading and discovering, what it is to observe Jesus. It's more than an intellectual exercise when you're reading the Gospels, though. And I wasn't just an uninterested observer, right? Just kind of perusing through the buffet line of life and finding Jesus a curiosity. That was not my posture. My posture was more desperate. I want to alleviate the fact that my life is ended. Everything positive that I had going for me is gone.
Yeah.
And so the kind of I don't care, desperation and fatalism that I was experiencing pushed me into the Gospels to look for the judge, to look for the one that I could deal with. And there I found the Son of God on the pages of Scripture, but it wasn't mere intellectual exercise, because as I'm reading, Greg, I sense a presence around me. It's funny, someone who enjoyed esoteric experience with drugs talking about presences and things like that. But it was physical. It was as though if my finger represented my body, it was as though a hand had come and enveloped me and was squeezing me. And it wasn't hurting, but I felt the presence of control.
So this is in my
coffin-size
rack.
All alone, curtains closed.
And this is as you're reading.
As I'm reading, Gideon. I started with Luke, I think, if I recall correctly. And I'm reading slowly, somewhat hopefully. Mm-hmm. But, I don't even know how to pray.
Yeah.
So, but I'm beholding somebody on the pages of the Gospel who knows people's thoughts. Mm-hmm. And yet he doesn't cast them away from him.
Yeah.
He seems to attract sinners and repel the self-righteous.
It's
different. Not expecting that.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking clearly to myself, if there is a God, he has to be a lot like this person here. His condescension, his understanding of human nature was so impressive to me. And then, of course, this physical presence, right? This affirming witness is how I would call it. I was still very, very much sober and coherent, and it seemed to happen and go on for hours that night. If you had come and ripped open the curtain and said, "What are you doing right now? What's happening?" I didn't have words.
Yeah.
All I could say probably was Jesus. Jesus and God there's a relationship there. There's some unity. I woke up the next morning feeling like the world isn't nearly as bad as it was the day before. My outlook had adjusted.
Yeah.
I didn't have an audible communication from God that night, but all I knew was somehow he's for me, not against me. It's a feeling, and it's just based on his character and from reading on the page. So what do? I work all day, hating life, but anxious to get back in that rack, anxious to get there and to meet this person again. And night after night, I began having more of these supernatural encounters. As I'm reading, real words written in English on the page, there's a witness, a corresponding witness, that is very much impressing upon me that I'm exactly where I need to be right now, doing exactly what I was meant to do.
Yeah.
Discovering who God really is, and that he's for me, and that there is hope. There's a lot of words that you probably, being raised in the church, have grown accustomed to. Words like salvation, making a decision, these kinds of things. None of that was in my vernacular.
Sure.
But I'm still beholding a person who's very, very attractive. He's scary.
Yeah.
He's very scary, but in a good way. The kind of scary that draws you in. And I remember not probably 10 days into this, I met one of my friends from New York that we partied together a lot and got in some trouble together.
Mm-hmm.
We're just talking on the mess decks while we're eating, and he asked me what I've been up to. And I kind of sheepishly say, well, looking around, I've been reading, you know. He's like, oh, yeah? Reading what? I said, I've been reading the New Testament. And he looked at me and dropped his fork. Like, what? You? What? I said, yeah, I've been reading the New Testament. What do you think? I said, well, he's real.
Yeah.
Jesus is real. And I was just expecting him to pick up his tray and go sit somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just based on our past and our histories, we both love death metal, which death metal is always satanic, you know, always has that raw, evil edge to it, you know. And he surprised me. He said, it's interesting you should say that. And he reached in his back pocket and he pulled out a letter from his aunt that just wrote him her testimony from Florida. And I'm just sitting here listening to him read this. I'm like, she's speaking the truth, Tony. I relate with what she's saying.
Yeah.
And he said, well, can I read with you? So we started reading together on the mess deck that night. Mm-hmm. But it was hot. You know, it's summertime. We want to get to where the air conditioning on the ship is really good. And that's up in the medical quarters.
Okay.
So we found a guy up there who would let us hang out, keep the doors open where the AC was good.
Yeah.
Pretty soon there's 3 of us reading in a high trafficked area where people are always walking through. So we're having lots of people call us names, laugh at us, say all these things while we're sitting there reading the New Testament. But it started to grow. And we had no chaplain on the ship, so we eventually got to go down into the chapel. We get the key.
Yeah.
Have our Bible studies down there. And just through reading, all we're doing is just reading the New Testament.
With a simple, there's no...
And not a lot of training, not a grand objective.
Yeah.
The Lord starts manifesting himself to us in powerful ways. I got to a point, Greg, where I felt like what the saints in the book of Acts experienced seemed normative, right? So, for instance, these two guys who, they're believers that I didn't know at the time, but they would come to our Bible study. They're from the Caribbean islands. Mm-hmm. At the end of our Bible study, we just hold hands and pray. If anybody had prayer requests, they would just kind of list it out. One of these 2 guys started manifesting a demon in the prayer. A demon had taken over his body, and his body stiffened up like a board. And his eyes roll back, and he's having something like a seizure. Yeah. And he starts foaming at the mouth.
Wow.
None of us know what the heck's going on.
That's like straight up from the...
We laid hands on him and just prayed, and about a minute and a half later, he wipes off the tears and stands up like he's a new man. He hugs us like something is left.
Just like in the New Testament.
It was bizarre, right? So just things like that started happening, and then the anti-Christian impulse on the ship became very, very strong. When people like me and others are getting changed.
Sure.
And we're telling people about Jesus. Because in the military, especially on board a ship, Greg, you spend a lot of time in lines, waiting. Waiting for meals, waiting for a doctor, waiting for something. So we have room to talk, time to talk.
Yeah.
And it upset a lot of the apple cart. So we had encounters that were akin to the book of Acts and hostility from officers and shipmates and stuff. So.
And how did, I don't know how the ship was big enough that your captain still knew of you or knew you, but I'm sure that the captain found out about your, or at least was aware of your, what was his
I think he viewed it the same way it is in prison. People, losers like me, oftentimes resort temporarily. If they were going hard for sin, they'll go hard for God temporarily. I think that's
so
how...
he just saw the pendulum swing.
I think he saw it as just another extreme.
Yeah. So he was just like, it's just what he's got to do.
Yes.
Yeah. But he wasn't opposed to. They weren't opposed. They didn't try to shut the Bible study down or anything.
Not the captain, but there were lower officers that definitely tried to shut us down.
That didn't like it.
Oh yeah. I was threatened with death by one of my superior officers, and it was something that I couldn't make sense of. Like, people don't talk this way.
Yeah.
But this guy I encountered after Bible study late at night was really mad because he was working and he needed my help. And he says, if you ever go to Bible study again, I'll kill you. His eyes were glossy. And I remember looking into his eyes and thinking, a normal human being's not going to say that.
Yeah.
This has a spiritual dimension to it, and I'm just going to trust in God's protection.
And you're not dead.
Yeah.
You're not dead. And you were just a consumer of drugs before your conversion. Like you weren't people weren't relying upon you for their
not
their hit.
Typically. No, I would sell enough to fund my addiction.
Right.
That was
on the ship. Yeah. But they didn't, because I'm assuming you have a certain number of friends, and then when you become converted, you like.
I lost most of my
Yeah,
friends.
they were just like,
Yeah, they were really upset.
Yeah.
In fact, I learned how to listen, to ask good questions, and to try to give biblical answers by necessity because of a lot of those friends who are really pissed. Because it seems just so fake. I mean, how do you go from being really on the edge one way, and then suddenly now you want to walk in the light. Now you want to walk according to truth.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden you don't hate people anymore, and you want to be kind to everyone. In that environment, it was painful because it's just easier to say people like you don't exist, and I can prove it. I'm going to make you mad at me. I'm going to get a response from you. I'm going to get you to react the same way you used to. When it wasn't happening, it aggravated things, even made it kind of more intense.
It seems like, and maybe this speaks to where we are culturally now than where you were, but maybe it's the same where, I think like John the Baptist, who's like, you shouldn't be sleeping with the, what he tells Herod. And we think that like, if I just be passive, I won't get into any fights and no one will oppose me.
Right.
But the fact that you yourself live a repentant life is condemnation to other people. And so I think what you're saying is like, even though you didn't come out and say like you shouldn't, maybe you did or didn't, but like you're just passive and just like, I'm just going to live a repentant life. But just you doing that becomes condemnation to them.
I did. Yes, I agree with what
Yeah.
you said. I generally try to be passive, but they took the Lord's name in vain so much that I came up with...
You can't stand by and...
Yeah, after a while I had to turn that into a discussion about the judgment of God.
So you can't help but
the person that you treat as a cuss word, you will soon stand before and give an account of for even the things that you think, not even necessarily everything that you say or do. And that's like salt in a wound.
Sure. Yeah. So from your moment of conversion, how much longer did you serve in the Navy?
It was at least 18 months.
Okay.
Right around that time frame. And so in those 18 months, the Lord was so active. Mm-hmm. As I said, I felt like I was living in the book of Acts.
Yeah.
Me and my Christian brothers, it was a growing band of us from different ethnicities. I had Filipino Christian friends. I had Caribbean Christian friends. I had American brown skin, American white trash. I mean, there was a bunch of us from around the world. It was about 30 at a certain point. We kind of leveled off, even though there was an inner circle. We had big Bible studies. When we would go out in the town to pass out tracts and engage people at malls, we would even go to festivals that were, questionable to witness, because we felt like if God saved us, it's for a purpose.
Yeah.
We're here to represent the kingdom.
So when you make Anchor and you go into
yeah. So it's what I kind of described as a bit of a revival, because there wasn't a witness, a living witness. And then there was a very, very strong living witness in a place where there was very little hope. As I said, the ship was a very depressing place because of its charter, its mission. It was meant to be underway 8 out of 12 months a year working. So we had the lowest morale, and the fewest people would stay in the military after having served on board my ship.
The reputation precedes it,
Yeah, the whole Eastern Fleet, it had the lowest retention rate.
Yeah.
So it's a depressing career ender. So in this 18-month time period where I know that the scripture says if you're a slave and you can be made free, do it. So I'm not planning to re-enlist.
You're like, I'm out. Yeah.
But I always thought, well, it would be nice if I could be a chaplain.
Yeah.
Because here was my thing, though. I knew that what the military was asking was much too big of an ask for you to take the oath that they're asking, to sell your soul to your covenant. And I knew as a Christian, I don't have the freedom to sell my soul again. But there was so much fruit, Greg. I mean, the miracles, the kinds of people we were meeting, the people we would happen upon. I always felt almost every day that I was living in God's intended plan. And even when I got out, when the mode of my day-to-day life changed radically, the only contrast I had was back then, during that 18-month window when it felt like I was living the book of Acts. So you can imagine how semi-depressed I could get in Portland trying to witness to my family.
Yeah.
My family who liked me better as a flippin' sinner than they like me now.
Right, because you didn't condemn their life.
Yeah. So I experienced, because of how good it was, how fruitful it was during that time period, I did experience a bit of doubt and wondering if I'd made the wrong choice in getting out.
Yeah. I wonder how much, of course they say there are no atheists in foxholes.
Right.
Like how much that experience caused something really great, among your 30 peers that share this amazing thing. And you come back and it just comes back to, obviously, even Portland and just the mediocrity of, the American church. So you come back. So what year did you come back?
94, fall of 94.
Fall of 94, and how old were you?
I was 22.
22.
Yeah, because yeah.
So, did you qualify for a GI Bill?
I did not. Remember all the trouble I told you I got in?
So I disqualified you from...
So I'll bring it full circle. You had to pay for your GI Bill back in those days. So you had to contribute.
Doesn't defeat the purpose of...
No, it was a small contribution.
Okay.
It's like...
Yeah.
But remember I told you I had made a deal with the judge?
Yes.
So part of that deal was to pay back that sheriff for trashing his really, really nice car. And so while I'm in boot camp even, I'm cashing in and sending this money back to the court so that they don't come arrest me. So I literally couldn't afford the GI Bill.
Oh, okay. So what did you do for work then?
My sense of destiny was really great. The Lord's presence and power on me were such that I really expected to get some kind of communication from the Lord as needed.
Yeah.
It wasn't... Again, the Bible didn't teach me this. It was just my experience at the time. And so it was a bit childish to expect that all future happenings would be like the past.
Yeah.
I started experiencing less of the miraculous, and I had to rely more and more on the promise of God.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have the kind of direction that you would want a 22-year-old friend or brother to have. When I came back to Portland, my primary objective was to witness to all of my friends and extended family that I knew. Because Jesus told the disciples in the Great Commission, starting in Jerusalem and Judea and then all to the ends of the earth, for me, my Jerusalem was Portland. That was my starting point. Yeah. And so I was on mission there. So I was only working odd things on the side to fund my regular mission. Within a couple of months, I visit my uncle up in Vancouver. He had married a Korean lady, and they had a grocery store.
Vancouver, Washington.
Yeah. And so I saw him, and he was at his low point, bags under his eyes, working 7 days a week. They're not making a profit. They're going in the hole. 7 days a week. He's just rough. And so I says, why don't you let me take over the store for you? We'll shut it down over time. You get back into the tech sector. This would be my way of helping you.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I made an agreement to help him. He's my mom's brother, my Uncle Jim. And it worked out. But I had another uncle. His little brother, Norm, was living in Central Oregon at the time. And he was a contractor, professional installing flooring, commercial residential flooring. He had a disc in his back rupture. And so he and my cousins were kind of in the poorhouse all of a sudden. So I went from helping one uncle, and I transferred that over to this other uncle to just go and donate my time and labor, whatever I could do, to try to help them from poverty. That's where I met my wife through the church that they were part of. And
what was the name of it?
It was at the time called Cascade Praise Cathedral. It was an independent, charismatic church, really poor leadership, poor theology.
Yeah.
So my affinity for the charismatic church was simply that they seemed to experience and express what I had experienced. Unfortunately, they didn't have it. It wasn't predicated as a response to the Christ of the Gospels necessarily. I didn't realize, coming back home was my first real time trying to find a church where you're making commitments and hopefully long-term friendships. But Cascade Praise Cathedral is where I met my wife, Jennifer. She was volunteering in youth and nursery and stuff, and I had taken a private vow to remain chaste for the Lord.
Chaste, but not eternally single.
I didn't want to marry.
You didn't want to? Okay.
Yeah, I got this ring with the little ichthus fish on it just because I wanted to remind myself that I'm saved not for the flesh, but I'm saved for Him. And
then you meet Jennifer, and there's problems.
Look, it's really hard for a young man to crucify his flesh.
Yeah.
It's a dying that you have to practice multiple times a day, and I kept having these dreams and visions, which I assume were from the enemy.
Right. Yeah.
And they weren't. They were from the Lord, and it was humbling because I, at the time, thinking, I can hear, Lord, I want to serve you in this fashion.
Yeah.
I want to prove that you are more than enough for me. But He showed me that I don't know my own heart.
Yeah.
And He has His own plans. So having a wife and 5 children was very much part of His plan.
How long was it from the time you met to engagement and marriage?
Oh gosh, so we met, and I knew in October of '95 that she was going to be my wife. She didn't know.
It seems to be a common,
common
story.
I had a strong sense of leading in that department, and then we married in April of '97. So that's 18.
Yeah.
It's not a very long period of time. It's about 18 months.
Yeah.
So.
And then, when you got married, what did you do did you still run that?
When I was in Central Oregon, remember I was helping my Uncle Norm.
Okay, yeah.
He was a flooring guy, and I had no interest or desire, but I was just serving him.
Yeah.
The thought occurred to me, it's like, I'm here, I'm devoting myself to this full time, why don't you do it well?
Yeah.
And so once I made that decision to excel at it, I was picking my uncle's brain 24/7, learning everything he can teach me. I got my contractor's license pretty quickly thereafter.
So this is in Central Oregon?
Yeah.
Like Bend or?
Bend, yeah.
Bend. And did you get, with that church that you met Jennifer in, was it in Bend as well? Or?
It was.
It was. Okay, so you started your marriage, your life in Bend, and you became a contractor. And
That's right. It's weird how construction famines happen.
Sure.
They're tied not just to the macro, but kind of the micro local economy. At that time, I remember in the winter of '96, it just dried out.
Well, in Bend, it's less so now, but there was a lot more seasonal market, right? So So the winter is kind of no construction.
You'll know people who are contractors who have a whole different career in the winter just because things dry up so bad. Well, I wasn't fortunate enough to have been situated like that.
Yeah.
I had to move back to Portland, where they're working all year round in construction.
I see. So you moved back to Portland.
I know. I left Jennifer there, but she left. We'd already, our hearts were knit.
Sure.
And we were engaged.
Yeah.
So for me, it was more about going ahead, doing something sacrificial in order to get prepared for marriage. She inevitably was able to come up and live with her sister, who was going to university here, and finish her high school diploma while I was working.
Yeah.
So that helped a lot. Her parents eventually moved up.
Okay, so you eventually, so you were a contractor up in Portland at that point.
Yes, I was.
Yeah. And was it general contracting or? Okay.
Nope, it was subcontracting for floors.
For floors,
specifically for floors.
So still on the floors.
Yeah.
Like hardwoods and linoleum and.
Mostly the simpler vinyls, carpets.
Okay.
Both commercial and residential.
Yeah.
So it didn't require. To me, it wasn't very difficult to do.
Yeah.
Even though it was physically taxing, it wasn't mentally challenging.
Yeah. So then, And I don't know this complete story, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. So at some point you develop some type of condition because of something that happened in the Navy. What's that? So what happened there?
Yeah. In the first Gulf War, Desert Shield, there was a red zone. The reputation of Saddam Hussein was that he has gassed and used chemical weapons on his own people, on his enemies in the past.
Like mustard or...
I know that he's gassed the Kurds in the north.
Okay. Yeah.
It was deadly gas, right? So we thought, the military and the politicians that were pushing the military at the time thought, well, anthrax is really easy. Let's try the anthrax vaccine on our people, and there was no room for disagreement.
Sure, it's
You're
military.
in the theater of the war.
Yeah, it's not like you have a opt out. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you want to have a career and you don't want to go to military prison, you take the jabs. So they gave us two. They gave us anthrax and they gave us bromide, not on the same day.
Okay.
But the fear was you're in this red zone.
Sure. Yeah. You could die from.
We're testing for airborne pathogens all the time.
Yeah.
We're doing training for how to cleanse and, just more of the acute wartime side of that.
Yeah.
You know where your gas mask is 24/7.
Sure. Yeah.
While you're in this mode. I didn't have my first symptoms until I was almost out of the Navy. I didn't know it. It's in hindsight, right? Retrospectively,
yeah,
you're
you can look back. Yeah.
But I mean, I had a habit of working out in the gym and pushing so much weight. I remember one day going and grabbing my warm-up weight for bench press, which is a fraction.
Sure.
And it collapsing on me. I remember not being able to turn a doorknob.
That's scary.
You're just losing that fine control and stuff.
And you're like in your early 20s.
Yeah, I'm 21 at the time.
Yeah, that's kind of scary to have that.
Yeah.
It's not like, if you're like 50 or 60, that's one thing. It's like, it's just old age. But you're at the prime of your youth. And
yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to chalk it up to. It was a couple years after I got out. I had braces on my teeth. 1/4 of my face went numb. Like numb to the touch. And so I went back to the brace guy, the orthodontist, and I said, "What are you doing to me, man?" He's like, "There's nothing wrong with you."
Yeah.
But he made notes of it in 95 or 96. And then in 99, again, my legs went numb from the knees down.
Oh my God.
And I go to a chiropractor. Like, oh, yeah, we're going to fix this, fix that. In all of these cases, these episodes last about 5 to 6 weeks, which is typical for MS. So I wasn't diagnosed until 2002.
Okay.
It's irony of all ironies is that I was a contractor working on a brand new build out for the VA hospital in Vancouver, Washington.
Yeah.
So I'm there. There's an emergency room across the building over there, and I can't push a broom. I can't turn a doorknob. I'm losing control of my body, and it's freaky and scary.
Sure.
And I've never been on welfare before. I've never asked for help. You just work.
And it's not like your chosen vocation. It's not like if you're a computer programmer or something, like you could find ways around it. But like this is like...
There's no life hack for this.
I suppose if you're really well, you could sub everything out and you just become the pencil pusher.
Ultimately, I was going to do that. See, just prior to this 2002 attack, Jenny and I had a plan. We were going to work hard, save, and we were going to buy a fourplex. That was the idea of building wealth.
Sure.
If we could buy a fourplex, we can live in one of the four.
This is like all the rage, right? Like that. You were ahead of your time because that's what all the
We had a plan.
Yeah.
And we were pretty close to executing the plan. I had a VA loan. There was a lot of things going for us.
Yeah.
But then this major attack happens in October of 2002, where I can't push a broom or turn a doorknob, and I'm at that VA hospital that I'm working on, and I go over to the ER and I just tell them I'm a veteran.
Yeah.
Is there anything you can do? You know, check me out. There's a nurse who's working there as a substitute. She's not even in the VA system. She's just like a roving sub.
Yeah.
And she does, these coordination tests with me, kind of a neurological tests, and she ordered an MRI, which was kind of like pushing the envelope for her.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of getting diagnosed. It's funny. I got to tell you about the diagnosis day when they actually brought it to me, Greg, because it was really an example of really poor bedside manner.
Okay.
Same ER. I'd already got the MRI. I still can't push the broom.
Yeah.
I'm really troubled about my physical person. And I went in there and I'm kind of demanding, what's the results? You guys have had this MRI for 6 days and my life is going minute by minute and it really, really sucks. I've got a young wife and 2 small kids at home. Mm-hmm. I feel like I'm dying. I feel like I'm 85 years old and my body's winding down. That's the sensation that I had at the time. So I'm in this room and I'm waiting for someone to come in and tell me the results of the MRI. There was a nurse already in there and she's looking at a monitor and I'm looking at the back of the monitor, I'm looking at her and she's all la-di-da-di-da. She's just kind of scanning and then she goes, she covers her mouth, takes a breath.
Not something you want to hear.
And she looks at me and she goes, I'm so sorry. And she gets up and leaves.
Yeah.
She's so sorry. And so I'm just sitting there privately praying to God saying, Lord, this is so funny. Have mercy on her. She has no idea how bad.
And I know this. I don't know if that was, I would assume it's still true then as it's true now, is that the techs, their job is just to take the MRI. Like they're told explicitly, you're not allowed to, like, it could look like a tumor, it could look like cancer. Your job is just to take the picture.
Right.
So it has to be a doctor. It has to be someone with more authority to be able to say what it is. Yeah. But they're like, oh, this is probably blank. And they can't tell you because,
So when the doctor did come in and tell me, they give you 3 possibilities, but they always end with the one that they think it is. And so they give you 2 throwaways that you never heard of before. And then it's multiple sclerosis. Yeah. When he says multiple sclerosis.
It could be aliens. It could be.
When I hear him, it's as though I hear him say muscular dystrophy. Jerry's kids. Remember they used to do those? Yeah. Anyway, so I felt like, okay, it is a degenerative disease. I'm dying. That's what I think. And so I remember getting up and walking out. It was a sunny day. I walked out into the grass and just started praying to God. And all I could say at the time was, all I've ever known, Lord, is your goodness, your loving kindness. So somehow this must be part of that. Yeah. Even if dying is there. And I remember driving home and thinking, how am I going to tell my wife, you know, and these kinds of things. And she's just young. But I knew God's sense of control was still there, even though as painful and foreboding as it seemed. That month that I was diagnosed, we had launched out and planted a new church in Milwaukee, and we were in the middle of a series that I was teaching on the sovereignty of God and salvation.
Very apropos.
This is kind of one of the center crown jewel of Reformed theology. Part of Reformed theology is the sovereignty of God in providence, which says that God's intentional in all that he permits and all that he does, and that there's no other power that rivals or contributes to the things that are permitted, even though there's evil in the world, obviously. So here I have to live and work through the very practical implications of the doctrines that I love, the doctrines that I teach. While I'm losing control of my body, losing finances, I'm selling personal items like tools, vehicles, guns, things that guys don't sell. So it was long and hard those early months, partly because of the way the disease was impacting me, but partly because I wasn't able to go and manufacture income myself. And I'm too proud to beg. I've never been on welfare before. So I'm just waiting for a miracle.
Too weak to dig and too proud to beg. I know what I'll do.
Something like that. And it took about 5.5 months. I had a second major episode in that 5.5 month that really laid me down. After the second episode, I had my baseline change. That is to say, normal is now very, very different from what it used to be. So I was researching online, hey, did I earn any kind of educational benefit for rehabilitating my vocation? You know, and the answers online at the time seemed to be both yes and no. And I figured the way I could answer that question is by going downtown to the federal building, going to the vocational rehabilitation site for the VA, and just asking them point blank, did I qualify? Did I earn something by virtue of the war? Because it's not uncommon for the military to have special allowances for just periods of time, things that people do. It was hard, though, because the security status on the day that I chose to go down to the federal building was like a code orange, where it was really hard to get in and out of the building for security reasons. And I need canes to get around, and it was hard. And just getting up the elevator was hard for me.
Sure. And
so I go up to this office. I ask him, hey, did Gulf War veterans earn a special benefit, blah, blah, blah. And the person says, no, I don't think so. I'm like, thanks. So I'm just thinking as I'm heading to the elevator, there must be a different thing. God's going to use a different thing to bless me. But the guy says, I'm not sure. Why don't you go up to this other office? And I was kind of piqued by that. Like, no, I'm at the right office, and you guys would know.
Yeah.
But I'm in the elevator, and I'm about to go down, and the thought occurs to me, well, you're already up here. You might as well go ask.
Yeah.
So they sent me to the Oregon Department of Veterans Affairs, and I go in and I ask the guy, and he goes, why? Why are you asking? I said, it's none of your business. I'm a veteran, served honorably in that war, and I'm simply asking categorically, do those vets have available to them these other things? He said, maybe. It depends why you're asking. And I'm getting frustrated with this guy because I believe in privacy. Right? And who wants to talk about a newfound disease, disability? Anyways, he eventually pulls it out of me against my will, and I'm just pissed about this. And he goes, when did you get out? I said,
well, you're using a walker, right? You're using a cane.
Basically, 2 canes.
Yeah, like it's not like you're hiding it. It's not like you can hide it.
Well,
yeah.
I told him, this was when I got out, but I said, I lived this life, man. I've done a lot of hard things to my body that contribute to these things. This didn't happen to me in the Navy. And he goes, no, you don't understand. You're service-connected disabled. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't feel this way while I was serving in the Navy. And he goes, you don't understand. He said, for every condition under the sun, when you get out of the military, there's a 1-year presumptive period where it could be a bad neck, bum knee. The presumption is that whatever contributed to that happened back there. Yeah. We have the exception, though, for multiple sclerosis. It's a 7-year window. And so those episodes I was telling you about, 96 and 99, are within that 7-year window. And he's like, look, you have this stuff already. It's in your medical records. Yeah. It's easy to say that you are service-connected disabled. And as I'm sitting there thinking, this took a really weird turn, I'm not here to assign blame. I'm not here with an open hand asking for help. I simply wanted to know, did I earn something? This is my pride speaking, right? Yeah. And then before I left the office, had us on an emergency pension and had applied for my disability that day. And my world started spinning like, wow, God, this is not what I expected, Yeah. But it is good. Sure. It was a kind of deliverance.
So how much was it able to replace your income or?
It was, the emergency stuff was only about a third of it, but once I got the disability, it replaced my contractor's kind of a middle class income at the time.
So it came up to almost, or at least a comfortable life.
We were able to purchase this home with a lump sum. Okay. Because they retroactively got it back to when my symptoms first kicked in. Yeah. So it's truly remarkable how God was able to take care of us, quite apart from Paul Hartung going back to a criminal lifestyle or trying to manipulate things and to make it happen. I was literally pinned down, incapable of fixing my situation so that when and how he does choose to deliver, it's patently clear. Yeah. It's his hand that's doing these things. My boast is one thing and one thing only.
Yeah. Okay, so from that period until, let's say, so what year was this?
That was 2003 when my disability kicked in.
Okay, so 2003 to, let's say, 2018. Did it just get worse, or you just kind
That's
of
exactly
slowly?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a degenerative disease. Nothing I was doing lifestyle wise was making it worse. It wasn't like I was trying to
push the envelope.
Yeah. And people mean well. They all have diet ideas for you, or
eat a kale,
try
or
this.
Yeah.
But
okay,
it
so
was bad.
Fast forward to I know around the 2018 when I sort of met you.
Yeah.
There was you discovered there was some type of treatment that is not legal in the States, but is legal in Mexico.
It had not passed stage 3 trials
FDA,
here.
Yeah, okay.
It was in stage 3 trials here. In fact, a leading American is one of the lead doctors in the world for the procedure. But the idea is to reboot the immune system. If the generation of the disease and the activity of the disease is in the immune system, if you can reset it back to what it was when you were a kid, there's no memory of the disease. It's called HSCT, hematopoietic stem cell therapy.
This rolls off the tongue.
Yeah. You're basically using chemotherapy, the same kinds of chemotherapy that happen for the blood cancers, the myeloma.
Okay.
And what starts with the L?
Leukemia?
Yeah. Blood cancer. Same protocol, but they truncate. Instead of having multiple series over 3, 4, 5 months, we wipe out the immune system really fast, and you build it back up again, populated with your own stem cells. That was something I had been following in the research. Things had gotten worse and worse for me, so that I felt like it's now or never. So in 2018, I started fundraising, and then in 2019, I was able to go to Mexico and have the procedure done. And success for me in this case isn't the cessation of symptoms, it's the killing of the disease activity itself. So it was successful for me, and what that means is that MS, the engine for MS in my system, is no longer active. It's not active, the disease isn't active, it's in remission.
Yeah.
I still have the remaining...
Whatever damage occurred from that, from.
But there's a quality of life condition here that an improvement that I've had. Because with that engine turned off, you don't feel the inflammatory pains and aches that had previously laid me down. So I feel totally blessed to be in a community.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I can tell, you look completely normal. I would, I don't know. I mean, I guess if I knew what the symptoms to look for, but you seem normal to me.
You'll learn that a lot of people with disability sort of anoint themselves and try to hide.
They try and make it look like it's a mannerism versus
Well, they don't want disability to always be a part of every conversation every day. And so similar to when Jesus tells those that would
fast, to wash your face.
To anoint yourself and let it be secret.
Well, you don't seem as someone who wants to make yourself out to be a victim.
I feel blessed.
Yeah.
MS is painful, and as wicked as it is, it's been meant for my good.
Yeah. So when you and Jennifer went to Mexico, where did you go in Mexico?
Puebla.
Puebla.
Yeah, it's in the central part of the state, in the southern mountainous regions.
I've been there.
Yeah?
Yeah.
It's a very famous part of Mexico.
Yeah.
That's where they fought the French.
Yeah.
Leading to their May observation. What's their big Cinco de Mayo?
Oh, yeah.
The 5th of May was them repelling the French who came into Puebla.
Yeah. So you were there for how long? Because I know that when you're
about a month,
destroying your immune system, you got to be a bubble boy. You got to be.
Yeah, we lived in kind of a hermetically sealed.
Was it with the zippers and everything, just like you see in the TV shows?
It wasn't that extreme, but the building was kind of zipped up like that. No one could come in off the streets.
They have like positive pressure, so the air is always.
They have a couple of rooms like that for people who are under it, but then they would transfer them to hospitals.
Because you could die from the common cold, right? That's my understanding.
That's right, because you're literally trying to kill your immune system before you build it back up.
And so do they do all the shopping for you and cooking all for you? So it's all inclusive. I'm sure it was a lot cheaper to live there for a month than it would be if you're in New Jersey or something.
Truly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a month, and supposedly a month is enough to make you safe enough to get on a petri dish known as airplanes.
Yeah, it's funny. They put the word stem cell in the name, which is kind of a misnomer because the real trick here isn't the stem cells. The trick is to kill your immune system with chemotherapy.
Yeah.
And so if we can wipe it out, then the rebuild is where the stem cells come in.
Yeah.
It's in the rebuild that you have a new immune system that doesn't have the memory. It doesn't misbehave. It doesn't hyperact.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
But this is true of other autoimmune diseases too. So from rheumatoid arthritis to AIDS, I mean, there are conditions that are the immune system attacking your body.
Right.
And
Sure.
so if that's where the battlefield is, it stands to reason that any of those conditions, Crohn's disease, for instance.
Now, I'm speaking completely out of ignorance, but would they take your blood out of your body and radiate it and then put it back in? Or
Yeah.
Is that what they do? Like,
so what we do is we open up the bones. They give you a drug that makes the bones move, and it hurts a lot.
This sounds painful.
The bones get soft, and
you
they
have
open
arthritis,
up.
basically.
So the stem cells start coming out, and there's a high concentration in the blood for a couple of days when you're on this protocol. And so they'll pull those out, they'll separate those from the rest of the plasma, and save them in a bank for you, so that once once you've reached that critical level and they've tested you, and they're like, okay, you're almost dead, but you're not quite dead.
Right.
Let's build you back up.
Yeah, that's what I heard of people. I had a friend who he was young. He got like this weird cancer young. He's in late teens. And that's exactly what the doctor says. Like, we're going to bring you as close to death as possible and then bring you back to life.
Yeah.
And obviously a 19-year-old has a lot better ability to come back from the dead than
it's funny because I was not the youngest person.
Yeah.
There was a girl in her 20s. She had only recently been diagnosed with MS. She'd only really had one really bad bout with it, but she had enough wisdom to say, that sucks, and this will kill me if I don't do something about it. Here's something I can do about it.
Yeah.
So she did her own fundraiser, and it's been neat.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad that, you got to take that risk. And, So when did you come back to the States? What year and month?
It was October. No. Yeah, it was actually mid-September of 2019.
Okay, so it was about 5 months before the epoch known as COVID.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the understanding I had and what my doctor's direction was to avoid children.
Because they'd never...
Avoid contact with people, but especially children, for 6 months.
Oh, so that worked out pretty perfectly.
My coming out party was May 1st, 2020. So I got to come and worship, I think, for 2 weeks at the church and to meet your kids, hug your kids, before the craziness set in. But
that was, we were on, I can't remember, I've forgotten how long we were on lockdown for, like before there was no meeting at the church. Was that during that period though?
Yeah. So I was coming out. I was truly immunocompromised, but I'm getting better enough that I can actually be around friends and family on a more personal basis. And then that's when the world's going the opposite direction.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating when I heard, because you like, and we didn't know what we didn't know about the virus, but I just thought it was interesting because you of all people, I mean, you're not, you look pretty healthy. You're not like massively overweight or anything like these other things that you could pile on top of.
Sure.
You're not in your 90s, but it's interesting because like what we didn't know about the virus is if you got COVID, it's like lights out for Paul. It could have been.
Oh, for sure.
But what was when you first heard about COVID? Were you more paranoid, or were you just like, what was your perspective?
To be candid, at the time, I would not put anything past the regime in Beijing. So when I saw the hyped up video from China, where you see body bags in the hospitals, and then the hyped up video from Italy, right?
Yeah.
Those are the two centers where we're getting visual content about this thing that they're calling a novel virus. I did assume that this could and probably is a weaponized thing from Beijing for the world. And so initially I did take it very seriously, not in the sense that the regulators here do, thinking they're giving great guidance, but just as a human being trying to protect oneself from needless death. Yeah.
And then what was sort of the pivot to change your perspective on that?
The death counts didn't match the hype.
Yeah.
We were told this is the bubonic plague of our generation, that this is going to be probably 2 million people are going to die in America from this.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the death counts going, this seems a whole lot like a tough flu season.
Yeah. Which
just number by number.
could still flat. I mean, to be fair, it could still possibly kill you. I mean, I guess
flu kills a lot of people every year.
Yeah.
Pneumonia. My wife's uncle in Queens had been, in January of 2020, hospitalized for pneumonia. He himself is a war veteran who had cancer. But on his epitaph is the coronavirus, which I felt was really unfair and dishonest, because here he had 99 things bearing down on him to kill him, and then this one final straw comes along. And you're going to then assign the reason of death to be that. That's with that kind of gerrymandering of the conditions, and that's just one person that I know.
Yeah.
I just thought, with the death numbers we do have, those are being pushed to exacerbate and to match the expectation of the media and the fear that was going on.
Yeah. It seems that I my perspective, it seems that our society are so wound up because the fear of death was so. It's I liken it to the analogy of there is no God and I hate him. You ever heard that phrase? It's
the two tenets of atheism is there is no God and I hate him very much.
And so it's the idea of if a lot of people believe that either there is no God, therefore when I die, it's just like when my iPhone dies. It just ceases to work. It just becomes nothing, right?
Spoken from great experience.
Right, yeah. And in that philosophy, or the we call them nominal faith-believing people who are just like, I believe there's a God. But then when actual death, and we'll say fear of death is a better, like, people freaked out.
Right.
Like there's no sense of peace, of like, it's just like
it trumped everything else.
Right.
That fear of death just there's no more rule of law. There's just fear of death.
Yeah. Like the amount of, I think it was more a diagnosis of our society, of like the amount of fear was just, and Grant, I know that fear was peddled. Like I know that fear was used as a way to get ratings or whatever, but we as a society took this hook, line, and sinker of just like, I remember towards the beginning of the pandemic, like in April and May in Costco, and I'm in Costco, and that's when they started doing the mask mandate, and I heard yelling. I went to Costco on like a Saturday. I don't know why, but I always pick the worst time to go to Costco. I don't know. One day I'm gonna wake up and say, hey, go to Costco on like a Thursday morning, but I never do. I always go like on a Saturday morning. I'm a glutton for punishment. But I go, and I hear yelling. And I thought, I think it's like an active shooter.
Yeah.
I think like, okay, this is, I'm looking for, I'm just like, what? But my mind first goes to like active shooter, or maybe like someone. It was a Costco employee yelling at someone for not wearing a mask.
Wow.
And I'm like, and I just remember the same thing, like at Trader Joe's, that's when they first started putting the circles or the lines, this is 6 feet. And I like stepped over, and there's this guy, he's like 19 maybe. And he's like, sir, I mean, just like, I'm just like, dude,
chill.
It's like, and I was just amazed at how everyone was just like this could be it. Like this could be.
Yeah, to be honest with you, early on, I got very cynical about our experts.
Yeah. When
I learned, say for instance, the pretender Fauci says openly and candidly, the age of human handshake should be over. Yeah. Humans should never, ever shake hands again. And then that same expert.
By the way, did you see in Canada they're arresting people for shaking hands? Yeah.
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 This is the theater of the absurd. Yeah. But so here's our resident so-called expert saying that with all of the grand wisdom that he's gleaned over 80 years of life and being the highest paid government employee ever, that we should never shake hands. But then he gets in an interview with the Snapchat kids, and they're like, hey, dude, we really like doing this hookup culture thing. Are you saying that that's something we should not be doing right now? And our resident expert says, well, each one has their own tolerance for risk, and I just realized we don't have experts.
No.
We have politicians and people who are playing you.
Yeah. And how much he's changed. Like first he was up there saying, don't wear masks. It's not.
Yeah.
And so quickly to pivot
but casual sex is cool, right?
Yeah.
But no handshakes. Casual sex is cool.
That's just insane.
We have no experts. The experts
Yeah.
don't exist in this realm anymore.
Yeah.
If they ever did.
Yeah.
So fear is a very powerful tool in this moment.
Yeah.
Exceedingly powerful.
So yeah. I know you think very low that we'll be able to get back to normal.
2019 will not come back no matter how much you pray for it.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm telling people. If that's their definition of normalcy, the prior to COVID experience is not going to happen until something grand and final.
And I don't think that nothing worth happening ever happens without bloodshed or without a deep cost, you could say. Whether it's the American Revolution or, World War II, like you don't go back. I think especially these leaders, like they don't get this much power. And that's why I think the irony of like, crap, we got a lot of power. Like we just say whatever we want, and right. People, like the fear that was quick to, but it's so. But we're in a different era now, a very different era. Like I don't think you'll be able to travel to Europe at least without a certain level of.
That's a fact.
Like it was. It's just the same thing like before 9/11. Like before you could walk through, it was just a metal detector, and now just the amount of, we're not going back.
But the 9/11 changes, this is a good parallel. The 9/11 changes were there to remind us that we need government to protect us from those bogeymen who are going to get in planes and fly them into buildings from now on. Yeah. That's normative. The fear of people using flying projectiles became normative, so that we now expect people to radiate our shoes. And the feeling is real, right? Unfortunately, when it becomes determinative, the feeling, and we start creating policy on the basis of that.
Yeah.
And so what we've seen is exploitation, both in these examples from 2001 and more recently, is exploitation of natural fear, that sense of survival.
Now, what would you say to someone? Because I know we could go down this path, and I do want to brush the topic, and we don't have to go deep into it. But in our neighbors in Canada, there's that pastor that was being arrested, and people just say he wasn't arrested for the gospel. They just set rules. The rules were you can't have this many people in the building. So he wasn't arrested for the gospel. It's not like he said, Jesus is the only way to salvation, and then that wasn't why.
That's a naive framework for understanding a man.
But it's technically true. It's technically true.
Is it?
Well, I just mean that they, on paper, they say you're arrested for violating our rules that say you can only have this many people in this building.
From his vantage point, what was he being persecuted for?
For meeting, for congregating.
Doing what Christ called him to do.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Christ of the gospel called him to be a clarion and a witness. Okay, similar to, let's go back 450 years.
I'm just playing devil's advocate. Couldn't he be a clarion and a witness by wearing masks and being at 25% capacity?
He didn't believe so.
Yeah.
He did not believe so at all. And to imagine that the Canadian government can insert itself in a vertical hierarchy between him and his creator, and to try to impinge upon his conscience and the conscience of his congregation, that's pretty unprecedented for him and for Canada in general, and for the West in general.
Yeah.
So we have to acknowledge that. But he's not unlike someone like John Bunyan, right? The great Puritan writer of Pilgrim's Progress. He would not accept a preaching license from the Church of England or the Crown, because the Church of England never called him to be a Christian. never called him to preach the gospel.
Right.
They weren't in his vertical hierarchy. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So Christ called him to preach, not them. And then when they told him you can't without a license, he said, screw you.
Yeah.
And then when they threw him in jail, he didn't care.
Yeah.
And when they came to him with a physical license, we'll give it to you for free, just take it. And he said, screw you. You're not in my... In this realm, it's me.
I don't respect your authority. Your authority means, it's just...
He's not trying to disrespect. He's just trying to say it's not appropriate for the secular authorities to insert themselves where they don't belong.
Right.
Certainly not where the Bible prescribes them to belong.
Yeah. And obviously, like Canada, they don't have is it the First Amendment, the right to assemble, our First Amendment, which is the right to assembly, like they don't have.
They used to when they... It wasn't a legal right, but when they were armed, the government would never come and say, hey, you guys should curtail your worship experience because we think that you're living in a filthy fashion.
Yeah. 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 And that was, I wonder, like people who are, especially here in Portland, like, because Portland is, for all the reasons that we could talk about are insane. But there's a lot of, even Christians who are moving to Idaho or Texas. And I don't, like, so they're sort of moving away from, like obviously Oregon's probably closer to Canada in that regard.
Absolutely.
And it seems like things are moving, and it's not like China. I mean, this is Canada. We're talking about our next door neighbors who we share Western values and everything. Sure. That it's scary, but it's also I don't think that. Well, I don't know that like Idaho, these blue states are that, or excuse me, red states, Idaho and Texas are that far behind us in regard to...
I think what you said about fear, the way it's been exploited, and fear of death in particular, that is an apolitical thing. Even though it's being... Even among the atheists, it's worse for them. We know they have no hope. And so they're gonna scurry about and frenetically act like we have experts and act like we can do something against a virus, which is prior to March 2020. That was kind of laughable. The idea that you could create a physical blockage for a virus, or you could create a
even vaccine. Outside. Like I still am amazed. Like
a vaccine for a virus.
There's high schoolers and I see them because they run right on my road and they're wearing masks while they're running. Like, that's outside. Like, what are you doing? Like, that's crazy to me.
It's the dissolution of trust. That younger generation is inevitably going to arrive at a place where they say, these adults have misled us.
Well, I think there's a generational thing, too. And I know you're not a boomer. You fit, like, I'm a millennial, but you're kind of
Gen
Xer.
Yeah.
But I know that boomers, they are very much in a protectionist mode. Like, they're just like, I see this with, like, real estate. Like, the people who have real estate are the boomers. And they were the ones afraid of dying of COVID. And so they're doing this. They're doing the same thing that they did with toilet paper. They're hoarding the real estate. And all us millennials, and my generation, they're like, I need to get a property. They have this FOMO. I need to get a property before it's absurdly expensive. And so they're chasing it. And the boomers aren't selling it. And they're both reacting in fear of missing out and fear of dying, or just like, now there's a fear of like, well, no one's selling their house now. So if I sell my house, if you sold this, where am I going to live?
Right.
You have nowhere to live, and it becomes this. But it's interesting because boomers seem to be more in this paranoid, protectionist, like protecting what I have, protecting the assets I have, the house, and I know that whenever, like, fear will betray you. Like, in other words, the thing you clench onto the most, what's that verse in Proverbs? What that which the evil man fears will come upon him. I think of that phrase of like the people who are hoarding onto things are going to lose. Awesome. I don't know how they're going to lose, but you see this fear of like, and I get it. Like especially like right now, the boomers like they still have the wealth, and so they're the ones controlling the momentum. Where a millennial like myself, like I have 25, 30 years of GDP contribution left. So
I'd like to see you flesh out this because I'm tracking with you, and I tend to agree. I think you could expand it outside of real estate and take that same generational dichotomy, that warfare, into the healthcare space. Because I can envision the younger generation looking at those same boomers as not just using too much resources, but needlessly.
Yeah.
Like, so where it becomes like we're going to put caps on what you guys can do to pull out of our socialist healthcare system because your fear shouldn't govern what's accessible to the rest of us.
So you're saying that they would put caps on boomers, what they can?
Inevitably, there has
Right.
to be some kind of shortfall, and I could see younger generation resenting.
Yeah.
Anyways, this is for you to do your homework and say just
Yeah.
to expand your thoughts on that because I could see it applying outside of just real estate.
Like real estate is obviously something that is like happening now. Like it's disproportionately affecting boomer or millennials. Because that was because people were using the house as a castle. It's sort of the American dream of like it's a castle or there's no COVID in here, and but it's obviously affected everyone. Like it's interesting to see as we open back up or whatever. People go back to at least we're not fear of dying or killing someone of this virus. If that fear whipsaws and kind of comes back around where I don't know.
Do you? I mean, I'm getting this sense. It's May 2021, but the current dialogue is such that people who have been vaccinated are upset at people who have not been vaccinated.
Which is crazy because
like they're upset.
Who cares?
They're very upset.
Yeah, like who cares? Like if you're inoculated, and I know that most of the viruses are mRNA, which means it's not a slam dunk like the traditional.
It's not an actual.
We're not
vaccine,
right.
Yeah.
That it's like, but if you believe, I don't understand why you're upset about this. Like, why should you be scared of someone who doesn't get the jab because you're protected?
I do think that points to the irrationality that still exists in the fear that still does exist.
Well, is you're not playing along. You're not doing your part.
Yeah.
It's not.
You're not fitting into the one-size-fits-all solution.
Well, and the thing about, and this is what I'm really curious, because we're starting to see what havoc has been this virus has done to our national GDP and then the GDP of other nations. Like whether hyperinflation or whatever it may, like we don't know.
Those old metrics, Greg, I'm afraid are going to be of little use.
Well,
I mean, we're borrowing in the trillions now.
I know. It's insane. What I mean, and this is what I mean with this generational gap of boomers don't care. I mean, I guess they do care because a lot of their money's wrapped in 401k, which is wrapped up in the market, and the stock market is going up parabolically because of all this cheap. And so they have a lot to lose. Boomers have a lot to lose if the 401k becomes a 001k. But like millennials, like it's like we want to build something. We want to start a restaurant. We want to, but we can't. We're being,
Yeah.
It doesn't seem that there's, but again, the majority of the people who control the GDP are still the boomers because they have the wealth. They have the wealth. They own the businesses. And they're just like, I just need to keep my business alive, afloat. I just need to, yeah. And I don't.
Speaking of businesses, I mean, I read the other day that 1 out of 3 restaurants in California will not reopen.
Yeah.
1 out of 3. When you think about the devastation that would wreak economically across that state, it's hard to quantify.
It is, and we won't know these things because so much money is we won't know until the money is pulled away. And, it's like that. There's a great phrase that Warren Buffett quotes that you don't know who's skinny dipping until the tide goes out. It's like you don't know the folly until, like right now, all this dumb money is being thrown at it. If the dumb money goes away, then you start to see the folly, or at least not the folly, but the devastation of the folly. You wonder, like those people that have lost their job as restaurateurs, like what are they doing? Are they just licking their wounds? Are they becoming real estate agent? Like what are they? Where are they?
I'll tell
moving?
you what they're not going to do. They're not going to jump into another business investment soon.
You didn't think so? Because I thought. I know. Well, they might go to Texas. Like those in California, they're like,
who's essential? Do you have a short list of what's essential?
Walmart's
essential, but the local
any Silicon Valley job is essential because they get to, that's the have and the have-nots of like, they get to keep on doing their thing. They get to Zoom their calling. Oh, we just pivot.
Right.
They haven't been devastated. They're just, Yeah, I mean, I could see someone who moves their business from California to Idaho, and they're like, okay, I'm not under the thumb of Gavin Newsom. I can do something, you know, like, you know. Yeah, I don't know. We don't know, and it's so interesting because.
But here's what you can do. You can do a thought experiment.
Yeah.
Let's say that me and my wife invested the last 5 years of our life building this donut shop or this eatery up.
Yeah.
It could be a food cart. You finally got a brick and mortar one, and you're accustomed to working 6 days a week, but you told yourself it's going to pay off.
Yeah.
You didn't see your family as much, but it's going to pay off, and you built some equity into the business. You could have sold it before all of this.
I know.
And now it's worth
nothing,
and you were in debt. So the thought experiment is, how do you feel emotionally about that 5 year?
Yeah, it's got PTSD on steroids.
You don't volunteer for another one of those very easily at all.
Yeah.
After that happens, that's all I'm saying. So it oppresses and suppresses economic activity, at least at the entrepreneurial small level.
Yeah, I still think that we don't, and I think you try and look at history and say, okay, the 1930s we had the Spanish flu, and then there was the Roaring '20s after that, and then there was the Great Depression after that. So if history was any and what some people are saying is that we'll have like a euphoria period where businesses will open up and the new summer of love kind of thing.
People who believe in cyclicality would say that.
Cyclicality.
Right, that these things portend patterns.
Right. Well, I mean, but the period of euphoria could be shortly lived. What I mean is, it could be this summer. People start flying. I got the.
I'm afraid you're much too optimistic.
No, I'm not saying. I'm saying it'll be. People will start spending money. So I heard one of the things, and I nerd out about this too much, but where you'll start, we haven't seen hyperinflation yet. This is my humble, I know people, lumber's up 4 times, 5 times, but I don't think that's hyperinflation. I think it's not yet.
The producer's price index in the last month?
Okay, but here's the thing.
It's crazy.
What the government is, this is an unpopular opinion, but hear me out. So the government has paid people the minimum wage to stay at home. So you look at all this, I was at the grocery store, and there was no milk, none. It was just gone. And I asked the employees, they can't get truck drivers because they just ran out of truck drivers because enough truck drivers are getting paid to stay at home. They're like, I don't want to drive trucks. And that's what people are attributing to inflation is not inflation per se, but it's all the minimum wage people along the supply chain of lumber, of milk, of fill in the blank. And I heard that we're going to run out of gas, even on the West Coast, because as supply goes up, as people want to start driving to Bend or whatever, that they're going to need more trucks to drive the gas, and unless they remove the stimmy money, I'm not going to. So what I'm saying is. But we're not spending money. We're still not spending money. We're not going to Europe. We're not flying to Hawaii. When that starts happening, that's where all this money that the government's putting really starts going into the market. And the only way to fix that is by increasing the interest rate.
You have to siphon money.
Which is what is going to do havoc to all this free debt of these.
Which again is a disincentive for you to take a risk. It's a disincentive for anyone.
Well, if you're going to borrow money, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, you would rather borrow the bank's money than borrow Grandpa's money.
Yeah, that's true.
Of course, especially as cheap as the interest rates have been historically.
But that's what I mean is we don't know what's going to kill us, but we can I think we can say that it's going to be brutal.
Our experts will be a great contributor to that which is our downfall.
Yeah.
Our trust in human experts. There's an inherent belief among many of the educated and even people in the faith community, and they won't articulate it this way, but this is how I do it. They believe that out there somewhere are rooms, and these rooms are populated with white lab coat wearing experts. They're just on these keyboards and they're grinding. They have more
faith in maybe the Judeo-Christian ethic than we have.
The same people that they listen to say stand on that dot, or put the fabric over your face while you're running outside. When you unquestionably say yes, sir, That's a tacit admission that you believe in the rooms full of experts where they come out and they tell you what's real.
Yeah.
You believe that the news tells you what's real. You believe that employees of the government, come and tell you what's real.
Yeah.
That's, to me, probably the most depressing part. If this was the America of 2019, or so I thought, if this was, I think we would have seen some skirmishes and some popular blowback to say, what? We're literally not going to put fabric over our faces and believe that it's going to block out something as microscopic as a virus.
Yeah.
But you're not seeing, there's not that common sense kind of, wait a minute, there's boundaries to there's limits to your expertise, there's limits to the government's authority. No, it's the fear that you talked about that I think is overriding that confidence that we used to have, that we could debate and work and get to the bottom of it through popular conflict. Right now, where's conflict?
Yeah.
There's no dissent.
Well, and the people, like, there's this famous New Jersey gym owner who's just like, I'm not going to close. And what's the answer for him? Like, federal prosecution, bankruptcy, like, it doesn't, like, the iron fist is, like, they're not going to let up on him. They can't let up. He's a...
As soon as you become a media example, like the guy in Canada you were talking about, the government takes a special...
Yeah, because you've
embarrassed them.
Yeah.
You've embarrassed them. And so because there aren't 100 of those gym owners standing up and saying, forget you, he will suffer. At least he'll be one of the earlier casualties.
Yeah, you can't. I heard a great analogy, not analogy, but this idea that take three groups, Antifa, MAGA supporters, and people who are pro-Bitcoin. They all three of those groups, obviously... They have they know what the problem is, but the solution is vastly different between the three of them, right? That there's actually more commonality between, but the problem is it's like a house divided against itself cannot stand. Like you see, like the Antifa, like there's like, hey, things are really messed up. Something is not right.
Right.
I agree with that. Like something is not right, and obviously that MAGA people say that too, and Bitcoin people say like, oh, they're printing money, like. But all three of them, I think, are false saviors. All three of them, the one that we're divided on what will save us. But the fact is that all three of them will fail. I think, I think that they'll betray you in the end.
Well said.
Yeah. So, but you're right. It's not. We have to, as people of faith, as Christians, we have to keep our eye on, Peter walking on water, like he had to, like, you can't put your hope in anything, like in nations, in the idea of a Christian nation, the idea of...
No, and this is one of the problems I have with our brothers among the post-millennials, and they are our brothers. I mean, we see a lot of things the same, but it's a kind of optimism that's not entirely rooted, I'm afraid. Human nature can't be legislated to change.
Yeah.
It can be kept in check. You can put it behind bars.
Well,
I would even change the patterns of humanity with just getting the right legislation and getting the right people in power. Yeah.
Well, I would even take, since you brought up postmillennialism, I'll bring up premillennial pre-tribbers. Like, and they see that things, especially things happening in Israel, and they're like, there's like this giddiness, like, guys, it's gonna happen any day now. We're gonna get it. Like, and there's this giddiness.
Yeah.
Of like, well, unless I heard this great analogy of there were these and there's this book, Good to Great. There was a story he tells where they interviewed POW survivors from Vietnam, and they because they were in POW like 5 years, I think. And they said, who are the people who survived? And the guy who survived, he's like, well, I can tell you who didn't survive. It's the people who thought, we're going to be rescued by Christmas. And Christmas came. We're going to be rescued by New Year's. And New Year's came. And they ended up dying of,
despondency.
He said that they died of a broken heart.
Yeah.
They died of lack, and what I would say, people are post-millennial, and I'd say the people who are pre-millennial, pre-trib, it's like, if you if you have this giddiness, then that's false hope, and then people are going to be devastated if you put your hope in something, and it's like, if we have to go through the storm like the early church did, and whatever that means, and we could talk for hours about what that means, but it doesn't matter, because in the end, the meek shall inherit the earth. We get everything back.
I think you pointed something that's really important. I mean, those two examples, the pre-mill and the post-mill, they're not equipping themselves with an outlook that says, we might have to go through some tough shit.
Yeah.
You know, and we may have to trust and hold on to the hem of his garment while we're being drugged through the dust of this world. If your faith can't encompass that, how will you trust in the name and the work of King Jesus when he who controls all things has permitting things that you weren't expecting to happen in your life?
Well, they just take a long view. They're like, well, we'll just, I was talking to someone else, I won't mention his name, but he's like, well, maybe this will come true in 1,000 years. It's like, well, if you start like extrapolating that out, like you're sort of forcing your argument.
Let's just come back to the Bible instead of the maybe realm.
Yeah.
To have a grasp of these things, I find that you have to hold a lot of scripture in your head at one time.
Yeah.
In order to make sense of this generation.
Yeah.
The God who permitted me to be laid low with a really difficult disease also permits grand deception, such as we've seen now. And you've heard me say this before, but never before in the human history have we seen all nations behave at the same time in the same way to the same oppressive objective, right?
Yeah.
And so once we saw that kind of coordination and complicity and cooperation, not just the media, but the governments, not just the government, but the mega corporations that span these nations, you realize there's a planned future that's happening that's not going to be similar to the past in some ways. And you're going to have equipment and a thickness of callus and a thickness of skin to be able to endure in faith to the end.
Yeah. It's like the phrase, where there's smoke, there must be a fire. And some people, like these conspiracies, they're like, oh, it's the deep state. Like, no, I mean, if you're talking about Satan and his schemes, then I agree with you. Like, they're like, something's happening. It seems like some, there's people up there in the boardroom, like, though they are, but they're just not. They're not elites. They're demons. They are scheming, and we are seeing, we're seeing moving and shaking, and
Yes.
Well, that's probably a good place to leave it.
Nice and hopeful.
Yeah, nice and hopeful. Cool.
Good to visit with you, man.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah. Boom.